When were you born?
I was born 42 years ago.
Do you remember the
Today.
date?
Huh? 1926.
1926.
42 years ago.
Are you an only child?
No, I have a brother and I have two sisters.
Mm-hmm. Which are you, the baby or the oldest?
I'm the youngest.
Oh, I see. Were either of your parents artistic?
No, I wouldn't say that they were particularly. Neither of them were involved in the creative arts.
Mm-hmm. Where do you suppose your artistic ability came from?
Who knows?
Did you always want to paint?
Yes. Yes, from a fairly early age,
Mm-hmm.
I became interested in painting.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, when I was in grammar school.
Drawing with crayons and pencils and that sort of thing?
I was among the top 3 in the class in the 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say.
Top 3 in your drawing class, or top 3 period?
Top 3 in the drawing class.
What about the academics?
Academics, I always just got by.
Mm.
I always just hit the average in academic subjects.
Mm-hmm.
But in art, I was always very, very good.
Mm-hmm. Did you like school?
Yes.
Did you like it just because you knew this would be an opportunity for you to draw, or did you dislike the other classes?
Well, let's put it this way. I think I enjoyed, whenever there was an art class, I enjoyed that much more.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly much more than a mathematics class, for example.
Mm.
And I always look forward to the day when I could finish with my mathematics courses and get on with my art training.
Can you recall any impressions and experiences with your schoolmates as a child?
In what way?
Oh, anyway. I mean, did they think it strange that you liked drawing so much instead of maybe playing football or basketball or whatever the kids played in those days?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Were there a lot of kids who were interested in drawing?
Oh, a particular school that I went to, no, there were not. Not much beyond what kids of that age usually. Well, kids of that age are usually interested in art as a kind of a recreational thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my own interest went a little bit beyond that.
Mm-hmm. When did you begin to draw or paint in earnest?
About, when I was about 18, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That was after high school?
It was after high school.
Mm-hmm. Did you go to an art school, a formal?
No. Well, my original intent was to be a commercial artist.
Mm-hmm.
And then, my first contact with Europe changed all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to be a fine artist.
Mm-hmm. But did you study commercial art at all?
I studied it for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think it affects what I'm doing now one way or another.
It didn't give you any degree of discipline that stands you in good stead today?
No, because I never worked actively at it. I was just
see.
a student for about a year or two.
I see. Where was that?
At Pratt Institute.
Uh-huh. What is your evaluation of art schools? Do you think that they're helpful? Do you think a person should go to an art school or shouldn't go to an art school?
I think it's what the student gets out of it that's important.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can really be taught anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
then you can learn from whatever the teacher has to give you.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the teacher can really teach you anything.
Let's go back now to your childhood. What was the ethnic makeup of the school you attended as a child?
Mostly Jewish. Well, grammar school was mostly Jewish. It was in a Jewish neighborhood, and the majority of the students were Jewish. High school was much more of a mixture. There were Italians and Puerto Ricans, black students.
Did you find that being in a school of so heavily Jewish that it was tremendously competitive?
I never felt that. No, I realized that there were among the Jewish kids that went there. Certainly, there were some very bright kids, and being black, I certainly was in the minority. But it never really bothered me that they were brighter than I was in the academic subjects, because I knew I sort of had it all over them in the art subjects. And this is what was important to me anyway.
What language was spoken at home?
Spanish and English.
Spanish and English.
But mostly English.
Were your family a particularly religious one?
Fairly, yes. Catholic.
Are you religious?
In what sense?
I mean, a practicing Catholic.
No, I'm not a practicing Catholic.
But you are a believer.
I am a believer.
What were your reading habits like when you were a kid?
I read a great deal. I read a great deal.
What sort of things did you like to read?
Adventure stories, mostly. History. Good deal of history.
American or European?
Mostly European history.
Why European history and not American?
Well, because I always felt that European history was much more exciting than American history.
Tell me of some of your school experiences. I mean, were you active in sports, any of the other extracurricular activities?
Well, in sports, about the only thing I was any good at all was basketball. But since I'm only of average height, I never really achieved anything on with a basketball team or anything like that. But it was the one sport that I really enjoyed at the time. That was in grammar school. When I moved on to the high school, of course, then I was caught up in the academic, in getting ahead academically, and certainly with my art too, which I majored in art in high school. You edit this anyway, don't you?
Tell me about some of the players with whom you played.
I don't really recall them. I don't recall any of them, which probably means that they didn't make much of an impression on me.
Why is that, if you like the game so much?
Well, I was interested in the game rather than the players.
Well, the players are the game, aren't they?
True, but since I wasn't part of the team in any way, then it meant that I was never very much involved with the players.
Well, you graduated from high school at 18, did you?
Yes, I think so.
And then what did you do?
And then I went into Pratt Institute, where I stayed 2 years, I guess.
For 2 years.
A little less than 2 years.
And after Pratt, what did you do?
After Pratt, I went into the Army. And when I came out of the Army, then I went back to school, but I went back to Europe under the GI Bill.
Oh, how long were you in service?
Approximately 4 years.
And in which branch?
I've sort of blotted that out. I can't even remember which branch now.
Army, Navy?
Well, it was the Army,
Air Force?
but yes, it was the Army.
The infantry?
Well, it was it was an administrative branch. I don't really recall what I did.
Did you go overseas?
Yes.
Where?
Europe.
Which part of Europe?
Western Europe, France, and Germany.
Now, tell me about your military experiences. Did think that was an intrusion on your
No, because
career?
I felt, yes, I did feel it was an intrusion, but naturally, at the time everybody was caught up in the war. It was something you had to do, and I was just hoping that I'd be sent to Europe, which of course I was, and this, I think, subsequently had a big influence on my career as a painter.
And did you paint while you were in service?
No, didn't have a chance to.
Now let's go back to the 2 years you spent at Pratt. What was that like?
It was a course in advertising, what they call advertising design. And what more can I tell you? It was all very much oriented towards the advertising world. I mean, you learned illustration, well, things that are basic to lettering, things that are basic to advertising, commercial art.
Is it fair to assume that it didn't hold very much interest for you?
Well, at the time I was still thinking of becoming a commercial artist. So it was interesting. Yes, it was. It was interesting because I realized I was preparing myself for a career in commercial art.
Mm-hmm. Then you went in service after leaving Pratt, and you mentioned that you went to another school. Which school was that?
The École de Beaux-Arts in Paris.
Mm-hmm. How long were you there?
I was enrolled at the Beaux-Arts for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall any of your teachers there?
The teacher I had was not very good. He was not a very good teacher and not a very good artist either. But it was the idea of going to the Beaux-Arts, and in any case, the students were left very much on their own to paint as they saw fit. Mm-hmm. And the professor would only come in once a week, mm-hmm. if at all.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Paris and the years you lived there. How many years did you live there?
I lived off and on in Paris. I've lived there about 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm. What was it like? Tell me.
It was an exciting experience living there in Paris, and
these were which years?
Well, these were the post-war years, not immediately post-war, but in the very early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I consider those years very important to my development as a person and as a painter.
Did you find that the stipend that you received from the American government as a veteran was adequate to support yourself?
Yes. At the time, yes.
Where did you live in Paris?
I lived at the Cité Universitaire at first for about a year or so. I lived there, and then I found a studio on the left bank near the Panthéon.
Did you live at La Maison des États-Unis?
Yes, hélas. It was the dullest international house on the entire city.
Ugliest, I think.
And by far the ugliest.
Well, tell me about your work in Paris. Yes. Did you discover yourself, so to speak, in
Paris?
Many
times.
Artistically as well as personally?
Yes, yes, many times. But those years in Paris as a student they were devoted to really getting as much as I could out of being in Europe and being able to experiment with my painting and being influenced by painters, by other painters, contemporary painters, past painters. It was a time of discovering myself.
Did you meet any important painters in Paris? Any masters, so to speak?
Well, I can't think of any offhand that I've met. I met Cocteau, people like that.
Mm-hmm.
but I don't really consider them. While they were interesting creatively, didn't really consider them painting.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. I get the impression when I look at your paintings that they are very heavily influenced by the so-called French school. Is that right?
They certainly are refined, and I think you do find a great deal of refinement of vision in French painting, and probably, most certainly, this has influenced me in my early development as a painter.
Which of the French masters do you particularly admire?
Of the great modern painters, I think I feel very close to Degas, for example. Degas in particular, and many of the French painters in general.
Braque, Matisse, Monet, Manet.
Yes, but I mean, I certainly always admired them as painters. They had perhaps less direct influence on me.
In retrospect, do you feel that France or the French school contributed most to your artistic development?
I would say. Certainly when you, living in Paris for so long, I was surrounded by French painting, not only painters from the past, but also the great modern painters, and many of the painters of the contemporary school, whose work I was very familiar with, seeing it in exhibitions very often.
The German school didn't have any interest for you?
No.
No?
Not at all.
Why not?
Well, it's just that I'm not German oriented.
Now, you were in Paris for 7 years.
Well, this is all very approximately.
I see, yeah. During your stay in France, you must have traveled quite a bit.
I got to know Europe very well. I traveled fairly well all over Europe.
Of Western Europe, you still, of all the countries in Western Europe that you visited, you prefer France, do you?
I wouldn't say I prefer France. I think that since I lived in France, I'm perhaps closest to that country. Naturally, being a painter, being an artist, another country that I admire certainly is Italy.
Italy, huh?
Yes.
Tell me, Avel, are you how do I want to say that? Do you strive to escape from reality in your work?
I think that's the general mood of my work, yes.
Why is that so? Would you elaborate on it?
I can't really elaborate on that. It comes out that way.
It isn't something that's planned.
Not necessarily. It's probably due to the choice of the choice of subjects, and the choice of colors, which are somewhat removed from the immediate contemporary scene.
Which subjects do you tend to lean towards most in your work?
Figures, landscape and figures are the most important elements of my painting.
Human figures?
Yes, the human figure, yeah. And the relationship between the human figure and its natural surroundings, such as the sea.
Why the sea?
Because I like the sea.
Are you a good sailor?
I can't even swim.
But you like the sea?
I love to look at the sea.
providing I'm on a beach.
Mm-hmm.
I like to look at the sea from a beach.
Mm-hmm. And what about people? You like them?
And I certainly love to look at people when they're attractive to look at. And most of the people that or all of the people that I paint are, well, they have a certain idealistic quality about them.
Mm-hmm. What do you consider attractive in people, physically?
Physical beauty is important, of course. I mean, exterior is certainly important. By physical beauty, I don't necessarily mean that they have to fit certain standards that people consider beautiful. They may be beautiful to me and ugly to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's a spiritual quality which emanates from people, which I tend to be attracted to also.
Do you find this more common in the male or the female?
Doesn't matter. Equally.
Less tension. I wouldn't think that there's any immediately discernible tension in your paintings. Why is this so?
I don't really know how to explain it. Certainly, perhaps it's since you mentioned the fact that my painting is an escapist kind of painting. Maybe I'm trying to escape from the tensions of everyday reality and finding a certain calm in my own work, or projecting a certain calm which I would like to see around me.
That's a pretty good explanation. Your drive to communicate, is it always in this direction to project calmness, tranquility, peacefulness?
No, I wouldn't say that I consciously try and do anything like that. It comes out this way.
Do you desire calmness, peacefulness, tranquility?
I have it to a certain degree. I have it in my own life, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I say to a certain degree because when you live in a city like New York, it's impossible to remain entirely calm and completely aloof from everything that's happening around you. But in my own painting, I have a tendency to retreat into, well, my own world. And in this world, everything is order and beauty, as Baudelaire said, with a little bit of volupté thrown in.
Listen, I want to ask you, is there any one person in your life who has helped you toward your own self-realization? Any one person, or maybe there are persons?
No, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. There's never been any one person in my life, no. It's been perhaps a sum total of many different encounters with many different kinds of people throughout my life who brought things, given me things, or taught me things about myself, which subsequently I was able to put into my painting.
Who are some of these people?
No one that I can think of offhand.
These are just like anonymous gifts.
In a sense, yes. I mean, they may have been just people who I met for an afternoon.
And never saw again.
And never saw again, but yet they gave me something.
When and how did a personal identity, apart from these people that made contributions to your self-realization, begin?
Do you mean when did I first discover myself as a painter? Is that what you mean?
As a painter and as a person, because you said you were always discovering yourself. You mentioned that earlier.
Did I?
Yes. And what I want to know is, When did this whole thing gel, so to speak?
Well, probably after my return from Paris, when I decided to stay in New York and work here, and paint here. Then I started working on my own and really not paying too much attention to what was happening around me as far as the various art movements and what other artists were doing. And over a period of years, I felt that I feel that I have developed myself as a painter, or at least achieved some sort of identity as a painter.
Now, by your own admission, you liked Paris, you enjoyed your years there. Well, why did you come home?
I sometimes wonder. And I should imagine that I had reached a certain point as a student in Paris, and things were beginning to repeat themselves. I found myself going or not going to classes and sort of running around in circles whenever I stayed home and painted by myself. Perhaps the influences and the pressures around me were too great insofar as there was so much going on artistically in Paris. I felt there were many, many influences, far too many influences, I should say.
Are we speaking of social influences?
No, I'm speaking of artistic ones.
I see. Okay. And you felt that even in this enormous, this busy city of New York, that you could find a better balance, as it were?
Thought that getting away from Paris and getting away from the scene of my apprenticeship, so to speak, in the arts, I could better find myself as an artist.
Well, having lived abroad that many years, when you came home, what was your impression?
I readapted very well, I think. I immediately started to exhibit, and little by little I began to win prizes and this kind of thing, which gave me encouragement. But I certainly think that my training in Paris has held me in good stead, if that makes sense.
Yes. Now, when you came back to New York, you say you exhibited. You also worked, of course.
No.
You
I
did
never
no
had
work?
a job in my life.
I don't mean...
When you say I worked, you mean I painted?
yes.
Yes, yes.
And you didn't find it difficult to...
Well, curious enough, no, I've never found it difficult to survive somehow. And I just went on painting. And somehow I always managed to have enough bread and butter to keep me going.
Now, you said you've never had a job in your life. Now, how have you sustained yourself all these years?
Which allowed me to travel. And when I came back to the States, worries of that nature, because I was fed and housed, and I worked at home.
I take it they were in complete sympathy with your aspirations.
Yes, they have always been, I must say, they've always been very much in favor of my becoming an artist.
Are they still alive?
My mother is dead, my father is still alive.
Does he live here in New York?
He lives in Queens with my sister.
What are your sister's name and your brother's name?
I have two sisters, one whose name is Frances, the other is named Dolorita, and my brother is Rene.
Rene. Are either one of them artistic?
Dolorita at one time was, yes. As a matter of fact, the fashion illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to fashion illustration school.
And what happened?
She got married,
And that was the end of that.
and that was the end of that. But I think probably that the fact that she was, when I was growing up, she was going to school. She went to fashion illustration school for, I guess, a couple of years. And the fact that she was working in the arts, I'm sure had something to do with my own choice of the profession.
Mm-hmm. And did she encourage you?
Yes, very much so. I always found encouragement from all the members of my family. And I might say here that my father, at the time when I was growing up, was working with one of the big advertising agencies in New York here. And
In what capacity?
he was at the time he was in charge of ordering the art supplies for the company that he worked with, which meant that I always had an ample amount of paper and drawing boards and crayons and pencils and what have you to work with.
How was that?
Well, he used to bring them home from the company. I think probably with the complicity of the director of the company, who realized that I was very interested in art.
Mm-hmm. So you had a place to live, you had food to eat, and Daddy provided the supplies, and you worked.
Well, now this was when I was very young.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly I didn't depend on him to bring me my art supplies. When I came back from Paris and was working more seriously as a painter.
Mm-hmm. Now you went back home to live when you returned from Paris.
Yes.
What time? How long did you live at home then?
I lived at home for about a year or so.
Mm-hmm. And did you take your own place after that?
I shared a place with another painter. It was not very convenient, but we had a separate working area, separate studio where we both worked.
Mm-hmm.
And we shared this working space. It was very inexpensive at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm still not clear on how you supported yourself.
Neither am I. I always know that I had enough to eat, and I was always well dressed, and I always had enough. I had enough materials to work with, and I, of course, at that time I was selling work. Also,
All
I
right.
had begun
Yeah,
to sell
that explains
for not
part.
very much, of
Yeah.
course, but I guess I adapted my needs to the amount of money that I was able to sell my paintings for.
Who are some of your friends and associates in the art world?
I don't know many painters, actually. There were a few of the painters who were with me in Paris who have since become very well known.
Who are some of them?
Well, I suppose the most important one today is Kelly, Ellsworth Kelly, who is the leader of the Hard Edge School of Painting in New York now. And we were very close friends in Paris at the time. We see each other occasionally now.
Do you have any current heroes?
What kind of heroes?
Painters?
There are contemporary painters whose work I admire, yes. But no, I don't have any heroes.
Who are some of the ones that you admire?
Among the contemporary painters, well, I admire Kelly's work. Paul Jenkins, Romeo Bearden. Those are just names of painters whose work I happen to like.
Okay. I wouldn't imagine that you out to break or bend conventions in your work.
No, I don't think so. I think that my work is fairly traditionally oriented. And it really, it's certainly not in the present line of thinking of any of the contemporary thinkers.
What are your feelings about people who tend to bend and break conventions? I mean, when I say people, I mean painters and sculptors, etc.
I think that if they have something to say, as many of the benders have, that they should say it. I believe that painters should say what they have to say in the manner that they feel best they can say it.
Do you think very much is being said in pop art?
Personally, I'm not particularly interested in the pop movement as such, no. But I do agree that it certainly reflects a certain trend of our times, yes. Aesthetically, I'm not very close to it, though.
Are you married?
No, I'm not.
You've never been married.
No, not yet.
What are your sentiments about the institution of marriage?
Well, I think it's fine if you can find the right person to marry.
And apparently you haven't.
Apparently not.
Are you looking?
No, I never look for anything.
Well, that was short and sweet. Let's talk about your travels again, Avel. You said that you know Western Europe very well. I believe you have been to the Soviet Union, haven't you?
Yes, I was in the Soviet Union in 1961.
Mm-hmm. You can tell me about that experience from its very inception.
I was proposed to the State Department by a painter friend of mine.
Who was the painter?
By the name of William A. Smith, who had been to the Soviet Union. He had been sent there by the State Department. And when the authorities asked him to suggest a name of someone who he thought would be a good person to send under the cultural exchange program, he suggested my name.
And how long did it take for the negotiations to materialize?
It's a rather involved story, but I was scheduled to go almost immediately at the time that my name was suggested, and well, for various reasons, it was not possible, so it was put off until the following year.
Did you show your paintings in Russia?
I showed slides of my paintings. I gave lectures and I talked about contemporary American painting. And I generally lecture by showing slides. I had about a dozen slides of my own painting, which I showed and commented upon to various artists in the different cities of the Soviet Union.
Did the Russians think it odd, were they surprised that none of your work embraced an ethnic theme?
No, they, since as I said, my work is fairly traditional in concept, they took to it very, very nicely. They liked it very much. And the fact that I wasn't making any commentary, any social commentary, didn't seem to bother them.
I suppose what you did was like a lecture demonstration, right?
It was not a demonstration, no, because I didn't demonstrate. I didn't demonstrate anything actually. I merely talked about what was going on in painting in the United States at the time, and I also showed painters slides of painters' works, contemporary American painters' works, and commented upon them, the various trends, developments in American painting that were then taking place.
Who were some of the painters that you?
They were mostly, well, I showed painters, and at the time the abstract expressionist movement was very important here. So I showed several of the abstract expressionists, and I also showed a few of our socially oriented painters, such as Jacob Lawrence and Raphael Sawyer, etc.
Did they comment on the socially oriented ones?
They were familiar with the works of people like Lawrence and Sawyer, and I think they admired their painting very much.
Were there very many questions directed to you during these?
Yes, generally there were.
What sort of things did they ask?
Well, they would invariably ask why American painters were not as much involved with what was happening socially, and why this was not reflected in their work. This was generally the most.
And what answers would you give them?
Well, I would explain to them that it wasn't necessary to be socially involved if you were a painter, but that certainly under their system, I realized that social realism was very important.
Was that answer sufficient as far as they were concerned?
Not really, but I didn't
Elaborate on it.
I didn't elaborate on it because I never wanted. I was not one for getting involved in too much discussion.
Did you meet many Soviet painters?
I met quite a few, yes.
What were your impressions of them and their work?
Many of the painters I met, whose work I saw, I admired, yes, with certain reservations, but certainly within the context of what they were obliged to do, certainly they managed to do it very well.
Could you describe some of it?
Most of it, all of it, of course, was socially oriented, but in many cases the artist would take certain liberties with his painting, and it would come out looking quite surprisingly modern. But of course, it all had to be oriented towards social expression.
Do the Soviet artists have the same problems as American artists, Western European artists? I mean, as far as the life of an artist is concerned, the usual trials and tribulations.
Not as much. You're speaking of the problems of survival, I think.
Yes.
Not as much, certainly, because they're taken care of by the state, in most cases.
What does that entail?
It means that they have a studio to work in, for which they pay very little rent. Also that when they have an exhibition of their works, many of the works are sold, bought for the most part by the state. And of course this keeps them going financially.
Okay. Do they receive the money from these paintings?
The paintings that are bought by the state, yes. Yes.
Is there a fixed price on paintings in Russia?
I don't think so, no. I think that it depends very much on your value as an artist, your reputation as an artist.
Did you collect anything when you were there?
Well, collect is a very pretty word. The painters that I met invariably gave me examples of their work, small drawings or watercolors or this kind of thing, which of course I was very pleased to receive, and which I still have.
Well, what was your impression of the country in general?
I liked it very much. It was a completely new experience. It was a step farther away, really, from Western Europe. And I found the people extremely agreeable, very hospitable, very kind, to me in any case. Of course, I was there in an official capacity. But even so, I think that they were very sincere in their approach to me as a person and as an artist.
Would you like to return someday to the Soviet Union?
I certainly would. I'd very much like to. I don't see the immediate possibility of it, but one day I would like to go back. Yes.
As a tourist?
Even as a tourist.
Mm-hmm. But would you like to even go there and work for a while?
I don't think so. No, not particularly. It's not. Well, if the occasion arose, yes, that I could perhaps, that I could work in the Soviet Union for a year or so, I probably wouldn't refuse. But I don't know what it would bring to me as a painter, really. I think that since I'm not, since I'm more interested in another area of the world now, it would not mean as much to me as far as my painting is concerned.
Now, I know that you speak French and being half Spanish. Do you speak Spanish as well?
No, I don't speak Spanish, actually.
Oh, how is that?
My mother was at home, but when she spoke to us, she spoke in English.
I see.
So I never really learned Spanish. I have a very good accent in Spanish, and I have studied Spanish.
But you have no desire to be fluent in it?
Yes, I do. But it's one of those things one keeps putting off, you know.
What language did you speak in the Soviet Union, French or English?
English through an interpreter,
Right.
and whenever I found someone that could speak English or French, I could converse directly with them in those languages.
Which cities did you visit in the USSR?
Moscow, naturally, and Leningrad, Kiev, and then I went to the Georgian Republic and the Armenian Republic, and also as far east as what was known as Oriental Russia, I guess, which was the area of Samarkand and Bukhara.
Of all those places, which city or region were you most impressed?
Certainly by the region, by some places like Samarkand and Bukhara, which were fascinating.
And did you find the Georgians very warm, as they've often been described?
Yes, they're very warm, very friendly people.
And outgoing?
Very, very outgoing.
Are they particularly artistic people?
As far as painters are concerned, yes, there are one or two well-known Georgian painters, I think. Well-known in the Soviet Union, in any case.
They don't like to be referred to as Russians, the Georgians, do they?
No, they're very proud, of course, of their heritage, as well they should be.
Well, what was the total duration of your stay in the Soviet Union?
About 3 months.
About
Just
3
a
months.
little less than 3 months.
Did you encounter any difficulty with the food, water, or anything?
No. Well, a slight difficulty with the service, perhaps, which was always invariably slow in restaurants. But the food, once it got there, was very edible. I mean, I enjoyed it anyway. And, of course, it varies from region to region.
It can't, of course, be compared to la cuisine française.
It's not perhaps as refined as French cuisine, but certainly there are a great many refinements in the Russian cuisine.
Well, what's the Russian caviar like?
Marvelous, particularly when you can have it in a sandwich anytime you want it.
A sandwich?
Yeah. I would very often stop in the buffet in the railroad stations, for example, and they would always have sandwiches of either black or red caviar, which was quite wonderful.
Were they expensive?
Not particularly.
Did you find life there expensive?
It's difficult for me to say since I was there, since all my expenses were taken care of by the Russians. That is, I was given a stipend, which took care of my hotel and sightseeing, transportation. And stuff.
Were you guided throughout your stay?
Yes, I was. I had an interpreter assigned to me in Moscow when I left Moscow, and he was with me for the extent of my travels. So
Was he proficient in the English language?
very extremely, yes. He spoke English very, very well.
Was he an artist himself?
No, he was not an artist. He knew nothing practically about painting, but he was very patient and thorough.
He was a good companion, in other words.
Yes, on the whole, he was a very pleasant companion.
Do you have any political affiliations, Avel?
No, I don't.
None at all?
None at all.
Why is that? You're an American. You're a citizen.
Yes, but I've just never been very interested in politics. I've never been interested in them at all.
Well, you certainly vote.
No, I don't vote.
You've got to be kidding.
I'm not kidding. I don't vote. I've never voted.
Why?
I guess one of the reasons is to avoid jury duty.
Is that a valid enough reason?
Well, it's valid enough for me.
But you know, that's by the American way of thinking is certainly your greatest privilege as an American is to be able to vote.
Perhaps, but I've always been very removed from the entire political scene.
You don't have any feelings at all about our upcoming presidential election?
No, not at all.
None of the candidates interest you?
Not at all.
Well, what about the Vietnam War? Are you for or against it?
I'm very much against it, of course. I'm very much against the whole war.
Why?
Because I don't believe in killing people. I think there must be other ways of resolving differences.
Do you think that we should get out of Vietnam?
Well, if our presence there means killing the Vietnamese, yes, I should say we should get out.
What are your sentiments about all the assassinations that have taken place in this country in the past 5-6 years?
Naturally, I find them very regrettable.
Is that all you have to say?
Well, I find them regrettable in the sense that certainly in three major assassinations that we've had, I think that certainly, as far as I know, the people concerned were very much for the people, in a sense, and they were good people, and for them to have been struck down in the way they were is very unfortunate.
So you believe that we lost three great leaders in the late President Kennedy, the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the late Senator Robert Kennedy?
Yes, I think so, yes.
What about hobbies? Do you have any?
No, I don't really have any hobbies. Outside of my painting, I really am not very much interested in anything, except perhaps music. I like music and reading, of course.
What type of music do you like?
Oh, I like classical music and certainly what's being done in the way of rock music today. I'm very interested in that too.
Do you have any favorite rock groups?
Well, one of my favorite groups is the Fifth Dimension, and well, my brother happens to be associated with them, so.
In what capacity?
He's the musical conductor and the arranger of the group, for the group.
Oh, is that right? Interesting. Of the classical composers, which ones do you particularly favor?
Mozart above all, I guess. Particularly.
His symphonic works, or his piano works, or his operatic works?
All his works.
All of his works, yeah.
I think really he's quite the greatest.
Why do you feel that Mozart is the greatest?
I can't explain. I'm just very moved when I hear his music.
Of his operas, which ones do you particularly like?
The Magic Flute, actually, is It's the opera I prefer by Mozart.
Is there any particular recording that you especially found out?
There was a Ferenc Fixai recording, which I think was recorded about 10 years ago. And
You remember the principal?
Fischer Dieskau, I think. And I've forgotten who else. But I remember it was my first contact with that opera, so to speak. And I've heard it many times since.
What do you do for recreation?
Dance, mostly.
The current
Yeah.
energetic dances.
Yeah, this keeps my weight down.
Do you have a weight problem?
No, I don't have a weight problem, but it keeps it down anyway.
What are some of the dances you do?
Whatever happens to be current, I learn. And
What is current now? I'm not.
well, there's
up on
something
that.
called the horse, which is quite sexy.
The horse?
Yeah.
Yeah. How is that manipulated?
With great difficulty, I assure you.
Are you good at it?
I can manage, yes. I hold my own on the dance floor, so to speak.
Do you go dancing very often, or do you do it in the privacy of your home?
I go dancing. And also when I'm working, I'm generally listening to music, either classical music or rock music. If something comes on, some good rock music comes on, I get up and dance for 3 minutes and then go back to work.
Speaking of work, what is a typical day like for you here in your studio?
I'm fairly I'm fairly well disciplined as an artist. That is, I work every day. I generally get up about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning and have breakfast and get down to work about 11 o'clock. And if things are going well, I'll work straight through until there's no more light, or the light's gone very badly and I can't work anymore. Sometimes missing lunch.
Do you very often, like many artists, work on 2 or 3 paintings at the same time?
Yes, I think I do, very much so.
Now, you've described, in general, your style as being traditional. Well, for me, traditional means what we've been looking at for centuries, but
Which is traditional, but traditional in the universal sense. I mean, you even find it in contemporary painting.
do you work in both watercolors and oil?
Right now I'm working in gouache mostly, which is an opaque watercolor medium. My paintings are done in gouache. And for the time being I've given up oil painting as such, although I do have a technique on which I work with oil on paper, but in a more graphic sense.
What is your central interest in painting? What are you trying to say?
I don't know, really. I think that whatever I'm saying must be inside of me and it's coming out. I hope it's coming out. I don't really know what it is. It's a combination of things. It's combinations of the way I place a figure in a composition and the relationship of that figure to its background, to the colors. And they all create a mood. They create whatever it is I'm trying to say, but I can't really be explicit about that because I don't really know what it is I'm trying to say. I only know that over a series of paintings, they seem to relate to each other and they all seem to have some kind of meaning. I believe that the person who's looking at the painting should find out what the meaning is.
Do you mean that it could mean many things to many people?
It's possible. I hope so. I hope it means as much to as many people as possible.
It wouldn't disturb you at all if it didn't.
No, not really. I hope that in my painting I'm communicating something, and I think that I am, because generally people react to it. And I must say, for the most part, they react favorably.
You say that you're currently working in gouache. Is this something new for you, or have you done a lot of it in the past?
I've been working in gouache now for about 6 or 7 years. Well, prior to that I was working in oil, but I felt that the gouache, the technique of gouache suited what I was trying to do better. But I do have a feeling about oil now, and I think that I'll probably be getting back to it soon. That is a traditional oil on canvas sort of thing.
Have you experimented, or are you in the process of experimenting in colors and new materials?
No, I limit myself to gouache, and as I say, when I do a lot of drawing, pen and ink drawing, watercolors. I work a good deal in watercolors, and also I have this technique which I mentioned earlier, which involves oil, but on paper, so that the effect is more it's more of a graphic effect than one of painting.
Avel, when you began to work on a painting, can you describe, I mean, from the very beginning, your approach to it? I mean, do you have, obviously you must have an idea of what you want to paint before you go to your...
Not necessarily. Occasionally I do have a painting in mind when I start a painting. Or let's say I have an idea in mind. But finally, when the painting is finally completed, it never really turns out the way I expected it to. In other words, there are many transitions in the course of a painting.
When you say the way you expect it to turn out, it means that the final concept was not the original one, right?
Generally speaking, yes. There have been exceptions, but in general, I would say that whenever I have an idea for a painting, there are always unexpected things that happen which change it.
Does that disturb you?
No, because one thing leads to another, and if when the painting is finally completed, it says something, and that's the important thing. I mean, the fact that it doesn't reflect what I had in mind earlier doesn't bother me. But also occasionally I simply just start painting without an idea. Start with a figure or a head or sky or something, and then work from there.
Avel, are you concerned with Negro subject matter as such?
As such, no.
Why not?
Well, when you say Negro subject matter, exactly what do you mean?
Ethnic, things that have grown out of your own experiences as a black man.
I can't. I suppose that whatever I happen to be painting today goes out of my experiences as an artist and as a black artist. But and I feel that the types of people that I paint, since they're purely imaginary, do have an ethnic affinity with the black people. But beyond that, there is really, I don't think, any particular relationship.
I find that very interesting because you showed me a very beautiful set of paintings that you described as a series, I believe. One is called Sunset, one...
Yes, each painting evokes a time of the day, period of the day by the sea. And in these 4 paintings which form the series, the composition remains stable. That is, there is an effect of sky and sea and sand or beach. And generally there's a figure or figures in the composition. And the paintings that you saw are sunset, dawn, and noon. And there will be a night painting also.
The figures in these paintings are obviously members of the colored race, but you cannot define them as American blacks. I don't know if this was the intent or what. I mean, there are vague suggestions that on first seeing them that they might possibly be, and then you examine the painting more closely and you discover that he or she is wearing some sort of a robe type of garment that would indicate that it's North African.
At the present time, my painting is directed or inspired by North Africa. Yes, that's true. This has provided me with lots of material since the landscape and the people themselves interest me.
Mm-hmm.
When you say that they're obviously black people, I don't know that they're too obviously black people. Certainly they are dark-skinned.
Mm-hmm.
And insofar as they are dark-skinned, you might say that they're black people. I hadn't particularly thought of them as black people, but there are, as I said earlier, certain ethnic characteristics in these people, in the way that I interpret them. The fact that they have dark skin, I think, is more a question of the general tonality, skin tonality that I like to paint.
Mm. Now there's one in particular, I believe it's called Sunset, where the man is in a sort of sitting position with his head bowed on his crossed arms on his knees. Now you could call that North African, but there's something about that painting that is indicative of the American black. I can't describe it. Yet the setting is that of that part of the world.
It's quite possible that you might interpret it that way. The fact that the figure is crouched and sort of compressed.
I don't pretend to know that part of the world that well, but it just something about it. I mean, it's. I don't mean to imply that we are the only ones possessed of soul, but there is something very soulful, and certainly not what I think of being Arabic, or North African.
Well, let me say that, first of all, I'm not really painting North Africa per se. It's a point of departure for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think of it in terms of Algeria or Morocco. It just so happens that I like figures with kind of flowing garments, and I particularly like the mystery of the landscape there. The fact that this figure is crouched in the position that he is in, and the sea and the sky are in the distance, to me suggests a universal meaning, a more universal meaning rather than a regional one.
The earlier you described a new media that you're working on, the oil on paper.
Yes, it's an oil on paper.
And in at least one of the paintings, which are extremely attractive, to say the least, there is a vertical figure, and then there's a horizontal figure. Why did you do that?
Possibly for the contrast of a vertical with a horizontal, I don't know. There are many sleeping figures in my compositions also. As a matter of fact, someone said they never saw so many sleeping Arabs in their life, just looking at my paintings. But I'm not really conscious of painting sleeping figures. For me, they're dreamlike figures. They're not really sleeping. They're half awake and half asleep. I rather like that reclining position. And,
why? I mean, is there any particular reason? It certainly is an easy figure to draw.
There's a relationship between a reclining figure being horizontal and the fact that the horizon for me represents a kind of distance, unattainable perspective. I don't really know what the relationship is. I only know that I'd like to paint sleeping figures or reclining figures. I do paint many of them, and many of them are in the composition.
In the vertical and horizontal figures I mentioned a minute ago, the background is stark, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Why is that true? Why isn't
Well,
that?
because I'm more interested in that particular group of oil paintings, or oil on paper. I'm interested in the relationship between the white paper and the mass of the figure in the composition. In other words, I try and treat the figure as an abstract mass against the white of the paper, and the white of the paper becomes really as important as the figure itself, or the figures in the composition. Mm-hmm. And it's not really necessary to clutter up, I think, your composition with a lot of extraneous detail.
Avel, how many exhibitions have you had in New York?
I've had 2 exhibitions thus far. They weren't terribly important exhibitions, and
why do you say they weren't important?
I had these exhibitions, well, the last one was about, I think, 1959, if I'm not mistaken, which is almost 10 years ago. So consequently, I hadn't developed as a painter. Mm-hmm. And they were more a collection of pictures than they were a complete statement, although I must say that there was something there, yes, but it wasn't really me. It was still what I had, the various influences that I had been under as a student.
Are you preparing for a show at the moment?
Yes, I'm preparing an exhibition for this coming November.
Will that be in New York City here?
Yes, it will be in New York City.
Are you currently with a gallery?
Yes, I am.
Which gallery is that?
The L'Arcata Gallery.
Where is that located?
It's at 67th and Madison Avenue.
67th and Madison Avenue.
Yes.
That will be, of course, a one-man show.
It will be a one-man show, and it'll be an important show for me because it will be the first time that I'm really showing a group of paintings which hopefully will hold together and make a complete statement of sorts.
How many paintings will you exhibit?
At this point, I really don't know. I should say of paintings, but possibly 12 paintings or so. And then there'll be a lot of drawings and, of course, the oils on paper, too.
Will there be large ones or small ones?
The largest I ever work is 30 by 40, since my works have to be framed under glass. And this, of course, makes it rather cumbersome if you work in very large dimensions. So consequently, the largest paintings will be 30-40, and there'll be sizes ranging all the way down to very, very small paintings as well.
this forthcoming exhibition you're talking about, it will embrace a number of styles, this series?
Not of styles, because I think that all my work is fairly related as far as style is concerned.
But it will be in various media, will it? Oil
There will
on
be,
paper,
yes, there will
gouache?
be, essentially there will be the gouache paintings, and there will be the oil paintings on paper, the oil washes, as I call them, on paper. And there will also be many drawings, also which relate to the paintings and the themes in the paintings.
I see. And that exhibition will be when?
3 weeks in November. Last 3 weeks in November
1968.
of 1968.
Good. Have you ever won any prizes for painting?
I've been very fortunate in that I've won many prizes, yes, over the past. Actually, the first major award, my first major award was in 1958, which was 10 years ago. And,
What was that?
it was an award at the National Academy of Design here in New York, and it was an award for a marine painting. And it was a cash award for $1,000. And I recall earlier we were talking about how I supported myself. I guess I must have supported myself on that $1,000 for a long time.
How long can one support oneself on $1,000?
When you're an artist, you make it last.
What are some of the other awards and prizes? Have you had any grants?
I've had no grants. No, I've had no grants aside from the grant for travel in the Soviet Union by the State Department. But I have won many awards, and they have been mostly cash awards.
Do you enjoy exhibiting in juried shows? Do you rather invite this sort of participation?
Fortunately, I've never been rejected yet when I've submitted to a jury exhibition.
Avel, in recent years, with the steady rise of black nationalism, do you think that the Negro artist should now direct his efforts to the black community by exhibiting almost exclusively in black communities, colleges, universities, etc.?
I don't think so, no. I think that he should, but I don't think that he should exhibit exclusively in the Negro community, or the black community, if you will, or black universities, or what have you.
But you do agree that the Negro community should know its own
Yes,
art?
yes, I do. I most certainly do.
Have you ever shown with other Negro artists?
For the first time, I showed with a group of other black artists. This year, a little earlier this year, there was an exhibition which was called 15 Black Painters, I think, or 15 New Faces. Yes, 15 New Faces, in which we were 15 artists, some of us known and others unknown, or fairly unknown, each represented by two works. And this exhibition was held in the Pan Am building.
That was here in New York.
This was in New York,
Yeah.
and it took place last April and May, I believe.
Who sponsored that show?
The show was actually held in the American Greetings Gallery of the Pan Am building, but the show was sponsored by the Studio Museum in Harlem.
Oh, I see. What was the duration of that exhibition?
It was supposed to run for 1 month, and I think it was extended for 2. It was very popular as an exhibition.
Oh, it was successful.
It was very successful, yes.
If you had the opportunity, you know, in view of the fact that you've traveled so extensively, Europe, Africa, or any other country other than your own?
It doesn't too much matter, I guess, where I'm working. The fact that I'm in New York is principally because of the opportunities that one has for exhibiting here, being an American and being a New Yorker. This is my primary reason for being in New York. However, if I were able to, I would probably work elsewhere, live elsewhere, not simply for an extended period of time, say a year or two. I would enjoy living in North Africa and painting there, and or Africa itself, and maybe a few of the other countries in Western Europe that I don't know very well.
Does Black Africa hold any fascination for you?
Yes, it always has, and I feel that this current interest of mine with North Africa is certainly a step down into Central Africa. And I think that eventually I will visit there. And I'm sure that my work will be influenced by any trips that I will make there in the future.
Have you traveled as extensively in the United States as you have outside?
No, actually I know very little of the United States.
Why is that so?
I feel that in the United States there's not that too much difference between one area and another. There are certain natural wonders in the United States which I'd like to see, such as the Grand Canyon, which I have not seen. But I'm sure, or I feel this way, in any case, that the difference between, say, New York and Chicago and San Francisco is not that great that I would give up living in New York to go live in Chicago or San Francisco. And I don't particularly have any desire to see these places.
Do you know the southern part of the United States at all?
No, I do not. I was stationed in Virginia, but this is as far south as I've been.
You've never been to the very, very deep south?
No, I haven't.
No. Do you think that you might someday, that you've missed?
It goes back to what I said about America in general. I'm not particularly interested in traveling in America. If for some reason I was to go to, let's say, I was invited to Alabama to give an exhibition in Birmingham or in Mobile or Atlanta or what have you, I would probably go, yes. But I would only go if there was a reason for my going there.
You're not sufficiently curious enough about that part of the country or the life there to just go on your own?
No, I'm not.
Avel, what course do you think American art is taking in this country with particular reference to the black painter?
I think that the black painter should perhaps stop considering himself a black painter as such. If he's black, it's just one more element in his force of self-expression that's going to come out no matter what he paints like. So it isn't necessary for a black painter to necessarily paint black people as such. If he's involved in art, in any kind of painting or form of painting, whatever he has to say as a black person is going to come out in his painting. I don't think he should limit himself to necessarily, unless he feels this way, unless he's interested in making a social comment, then by all means he should do so. But I don't think that the black painter should limit himself to making social comments if he doesn't feel this. There's certainly a great deal of experimentation being done in painting in the United States today, and the act of painting, of creating, is such a marvelous adventure that one shouldn't really restrict oneself, I think.
But on the other hand, what if a painter feels that he can only say what he has to say via ethnic subject matter?
Well, then by all means he should say it that way, if he truly feels that that's the only way he can say it.
But do you think that is a limitation? Do you think it's a limitation? You know, we all have our limits.
It's not a limitation in that he has chosen this way of painting in order to express certain things that he has on his mind or inside of him. It isn't a limitation in that sense.
But do you think a painter should be able to embrace a great many subjects?
The painter chooses a subject that he can best, through which he can best express himself with. My own subject matter happens to be people and landscape, and I'm sure, as a black painter, something is coming out in these paintings. Not that they necessarily reflect, not that they necessarily are scenes of the ghettos or black people. But whatever experiences I have had as a person, as a black person, is coming out, I feel, in my paintings. In some very subtle way, it's there. And this is the essential.
Have you ever experienced any overt acts of racial prejudice as a person or as an artist?
Naturally, being a black person, I have experienced, I've had run-ins, of course, encounters with prejudice. On the whole, in my professional career as an artist, I've been fortunate in not having, not experiencing, rather, prejudice as far as my painting is concerned. That is, when I have shown the fact that I turned out to be a black painter has not affected sales or the opinions of people who...
You consider your most important exhibition. Now, is the fact that you didn't exhibit, was that your own choice, or was it because of a lack of opportunities to exhibit?
No, I have had opportunities to exhibit in the past 10 years. They were not opportunities which I considered worthwhile enough to get involved in. Either the galleries were not to my taste, or I didn't feel that I was ready at that particular point to have an exhibition.
When an artist says he doesn't feel ready, or he is ready, what does that mean? I mean, you have to feel that you're ready?
I think it's important that the artist feels that he's ready to show a group of paintings, because in a group of paintings he's making a statement, and if he is just going to show a collection of paintings, there doesn't seem to be any point really in exhibiting, which is why I have waited this long to have an exhibition, because I feel that now the work that I'm doing now says something about me, and it also expresses something about what I feel about life, etc. And in sum, I feel that I'm saying something that's worth showing.
Now, after having waited 10 years to have a major exhibition, the chances are that the public and the press alike could not agree with you. Now, how is that going to affect you and your work, if this should be the case, which I hope it isn't, of course?
You mean that the critics perhaps might not be laudatory, may not laud my work? Is that what you mean? Or I may get a bad critique?
I do not think that this would affect me adversely. I intend to show what I think are my best paintings, and while an artist should never feel completely satisfied with himself by any means, I think that the collection of paintings that I'll be showing will be a sum total of my experiences as a painter, my experience as a painter. And the fact that it may not appeal to critics is really quite beside the point. And I don't even know whether it would affect the financial aspects of the exhibition, whether it would stop people from buying paintings. I don't think so, personally.
Speaking of critiques, you have served for a number of years, I believe, as an art critic on the French-American newspaper. I believe it's a weekly, isn't it, called France Amérique?
Yes, that's correct. It's
yes.
a weekly, and I have been reviewing exhibitions now for them for about 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on their staff.
Mm-hmm. Now, what sort of exhibitions do you cover?
The general art scene in New York. I don't choose the exhibitions that I write about, but many of the very good galleries put announcements in our paper, and
they're the ones you review?
Yes, I share this with the two other reviewers, and
Mm-hmm.
where each of us assigned a certain number of galleries to review each week.
Mm-hmm. How gratifying or satisfying do you find that?
In the beginning, I did. I enjoyed doing it. I'm a little tired of it now.
Why?
I guess because I'm very involved with my own painting, and the idea of even taking out a half an hour or so to go and look at and write about somebody else's painting bores me.
Do you think you can give a completely fair analysis in 1 hour of viewing somebody else's work that has probably taken at least 2 or 3 years to produce?
I try and be as fair as possible. Naturally, I see many exhibitions which no matter how long it's taken the artist to put them together, the end result is just dull painting. Doesn't necessarily mean that if an artist works for 10 years, he's going to be a good artist. He can work for 10 years and be a lousy artist. And generally, I can, in walking into a show, I think, judge whether an artist is saying something or not from my own experience in painting.
Isn't it rare when an active artist like yourself is placed in the position of a critic, that is as opposed to a music critic? They're usually musicologists, music historians, maybe have played, sung, but not in a real, let's say, top caliber. Isn't that doesn't that pose a problem? Isn't it difficult for you, being a practicing artist, to be completely objective about somebody else's work?
It can be. Many times it's a question of forcing myself to make an appraisal of another artist's work, particularly if I don't particularly care for it. I try and always be as objective as possible. I never resolve the fact as to whether a good art critic is also a painter, should also be a painter. Well, this I don't know. I can only say that I've been very fair. I think that I have been very fair in appraising the exhibitions that I've written about, and I've had many letters from artists to attest to this fact.
Well, isn't there always the danger of being too fair? I mean, sort of going the other way, because you are an active painter yourself.
Well, one has certain standards by which one can judge whether a painter has something to say. I mean, you have to. I mean, there are certain relationships of painting, of colors and shapes, and these are things which hold true always. They're universal truths about painting, and paintings can be judged accordingly.
Even so, doesn't that place you in a very delicate position with regard to your colleagues?
Well, this I don't know. I can only repeat what I said earlier, that I have tried to be as fair as possible in judging, in appraising exhibitions or writing about exhibitions, and I think that I have been in the past. As I said earlier, I'm less interested in writing about art exhibitions now than I was, say, 5 years ago.
There hasn't been enough to stimulate your interest over a period of 8 years.
It comes back to my own painting, really. That as I progress as a painter, I become more stimulated by what I am doing as a painter, and less interested in what other people are doing. And I think that this kind of selfish attitude is shared by many painters.
Isn't there a great tendency for this to come out perhaps in what you have to say about a particular exhibition?
No. As I said, I maintain that I've tried to be always as fair as possible in reviewing an exhibition, and there are certain standards that one has to that one can be guided by in appraising an artist's work, and these are universal standards, no matter what the kind of painting is, really.
What happens, for example, if you assign to cover an exhibition, say, of a young pop artist, so-called, and let's assume that he or she is the current rave, and the work is selling like hotcakes, and what sort of approach would you take?
I would take the approach that I would try and generalize, perhaps, and since I more or less understand what the pop artists are trying to get at, I would criticize or appraise the exhibition accordingly.
Well, what about the quality of the work?
Well, when I say appraise the work, I would appraise the quality of the work in relationship to, in the context of the pop art movement.
Now, this is in total disregard for the fantastic success that this artist is enjoying.
His enjoying success doesn't necessarily mean that he's a good artist. I think that we have had many examples of that, really.
That being the case, do you believe, as I do, that one is almost obliged to respect success, whether it's valid or invalid?
The fact that an artist is successful is all to the good, whatever he's painting, whether the painting is good or bad. I mean, if he can make a living from it, fine. I don't know that success has too much to do with whether an artist is really good or not. Or I think the classic example of that is Van Gogh, who was really never appreciated in his own time. Certainly can never have been said to have had any measure of success during his lifetime. So that, and I'm sure that there are many artists today who are not exhibiting, but who are painting, and who are not successful, but who are very good artists. It's quite possible that hopefully they'll be discovered one day for what they are.